I should have known something was terribly wrong the moment I spotted a llama wearing a purple bow tie standing in my backyard at 7 o'clock in the morning. This wasn't a dog or a cat, but an actual llama, casually munching on my prize-winning rose bushes as if it had every right to be there. The second red flag appeared when I heard violin music drifting through my kitchen window. Peering outside, I saw 4 musicians in tuxedos setting up their instruments right next to my koi pond. By the time I made it out the back door, coffee still in hand, my jaw dropped. Rows upon rows of white folding chairs now covered my freshly fertilized lawn. A massive donut display wall was blocking access to my garden shed, and a woman in a bedazzled sun visor was barking orders into a walkie-talkie with the intensity of a military commander. She was saying, quote, "The bride has entered phase alpha. I repeat, we are in phase alpha. All stations prepare for deployment." Unquote. That woman was HOA President Patricia Belmont. And somehow, without asking me or even telling me, she had converted my entire 2-acre backyard into a wedding venue for her daughter's 350-guest extravaganza. Let me back up and explain how I ended up in this insane situation. My name is Richard Lawson, and I live in Sunset Ridge, a retirement community for residents 55 and older, though I often joke the age requirement must refer to mental age, not physical, judging by some of my neighbors' behavior. I'm a widower who moved here 3 years ago for the peace and quiet after retiring from my accounting firm. My main hobbies are growing heirloom tomatoes and maintaining my collection of Japanese maple trees, a collection I've been cultivating for over a decade. I own the largest property in the neighborhood, a full 2 acres that backs up to a beautiful creek, with mature oak trees providing natural shade. My lawn is immaculate, not because I'm obsessive, but because I genuinely enjoy gardening. It's therapeutic for me. Unfortunately, my property line shares a fence with Patricia Belmont, the self-appointed queen of Sunset Ridge. Patricia, a former event coordinator turned neighborhood dictator, treats our HOA like her personal kingdom. She once fined my neighbor Harold $200 because his mailbox was, quote, aggressively non-uniform. She patrols the streets with a measuring tape, checking grass height, and has been known to call code enforcement if someone's trash cans are visible from the street for more than 12 hours after pickup. She even tried to pass a rule banning bird feeders because they, quote, attracted undesirable wildlife elements, unquote. When her daughter Madison's wedding venue had a kitchen fire 3 weeks before the big day, Patricia decided my backyard was the perfect replacement. Not because she asked me, but because, as I later learned, she considered my property, quote, criminally underutilized for its entertainment potential, unquote. The invasion started small, so small I didn't even notice at first. About 2 weeks before the wedding, I saw someone trimming my hedges while I was at a doctor's appointment. I assumed it was the landscaping service making a mistake. Then, a few days later, I caught 3 people with clipboards walking around my backyard, taking photos and measurements. When I confronted them, they said Patricia had sent them to, quote, assess the venue space, unquote. I told them to leave immediately, but they insisted Patricia had cleared it with me. She hadn't. The next morning, I marched over to Patricia's house and knocked on her door. She answered wearing a silk bathrobe at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, holding a glass of wine. When I asked what was going on with people in my yard, she smiled that fake smile of hers and said, "Oh, Richard, don't be so paranoid. We're just doing some community beautification for the spring festival. You're going to absolutely love what we have planned." Unquote. Before I could respond, she closed the door in my face. Over the next few days, things escalated quickly. A delivery truck showed up with dozens of round tables while I was at the grocery store. My neighbor texted me photos of workers unloading them into my backyard. When I rushed home, the delivery guy said they had a work order signed by the HOA president for the Lawson property. I made them take everything back, but the next morning it was all there again. Then came the portable restrooms. 3 of them were dropped directly onto my heritage tomato garden that I'd been tending for 5 years. The plants were completely crushed. When I called the rental company, they said the units were paid for through the end of the month and removal would require authorization from the person who signed the contract, Patricia Belmont. By Thursday, 3 days before the wedding, my backyard looked like a disaster zone. Strings of lights were hung between my trees, a massive white tent was erected over my patio, and signs were posted everywhere reading, quote, Madison and Trevor Forever, June 15, 2024, unquote. They even had the audacity to put up a printed banner calling my property, quote, Lawson Estate Gardens graciously donated for this blessed union, unquote. That's when I found the wedding program someone had left on my doorstep. Inside, it listed my address as the venue and included a note thanking, quote, Richard Lawson for his generous donation of his beautiful property for this special day, unquote. They had even included a photo of my backyard taken with a drone, which finally explained the buzzing noise I'd been hearing at night. I'd reached my breaking point. First, I called the police. The officer who showed up looked at the chaos, shook his head, and said it was a civil matter. He suggested I contact a lawyer. When I told him someone was trespassing, he said Patricia had already called them and provided documentation showing I had agreed to everything. She had forged my signature on an HOA venue rental agreement. Next, I tried calling an emergency HOA meeting. Patricia's response was that the board couldn't convene during, quote, peak wedding season, unquote, and that any complaints would be addressed at the July meeting, conveniently after the wedding. When I insisted this was theft and trespassing, she sent me a cease and desist letter claiming I was harassing her during an important family event. But Patricia had made one crucial mistake. She didn't know that my daughter Jennifer was a property attorney who specialized in real estate law and had very strong opinions about property rights. When I called her in tears of frustration, she dropped everything and drove 3 hours to help me. Jennifer arrived looking like she meant business, wearing a sharp black suit and carrying a briefcase. She took one look at the circus in my backyard and said, Dad, we're going to destroy her, unquote. Within an hour, she had photographed everything, interviewed 3 neighbors who witnessed the unauthorized deliveries, and pulled up 17 different statutes Patricia had violated. The morning of the wedding, as guests started arriving and Patricia strutted around in a mother of the bride dress that looked like a disco ball had exploded, Jennifer and I were ready. She had obtained an emergency injunction from a judge, contacted the sheriff's department, and even alerted a friend at the local news station. At exactly 11:30, 30 minutes before the ceremony was to begin, 3 sheriff's deputies arrived with the court order. Guests in their fancy clothes stood slack-jawed as the lead deputy announced through a megaphone that this was an illegal gathering on private property and everyone needed to vacate immediately. Patricia came running over in her 6-inch heels, screaming about ruined dreams and community spirit. She waved the forged contract in the deputy's face, insisting everything was legal. That's when Jennifer stepped forward and handed the deputy a folder containing the real property deed, surveillance footage from my security cameras, and a comparison showing the forged signature. The deputy looked at the documents, then at Patricia and said, quote, Ma'am, you're looking at criminal trespassing, forgery, and fraud. Please put your hands behind your back, unquote. The sight of Patricia being handcuffed in her rhinestone-covered dress while her daughter Madison sobbed was both surreal and oddly satisfying. The news crew arrived just in time to catch Patricia being led to the patrol car, shouting, This is a conspiracy. Richard Lawson is a bitter old man who hates love and happiness, unquote. The reporter, clearly amused, asked her if she had permission to use my property. Patricia's response of, quote, I'm the HOA president. I don't need permission, unquote, probably didn't help her case. The 350 guests frantically called Ubers. Madison's wedding was relocated to the HOA clubhouse, but since it could only hold 50 people, most guests were turned away. The catering truck couldn't access the parking lot, so everyone ate crackers from the vending machine. The llama, which no one knew how to control, ended up spitting on the groom's mother. Meanwhile, I invited some neighbors who had also been victims of Patricia's tyranny over for an impromptu barbecue. We grilled burgers and watched from my deck as wedding guests in formal wear trudged through the clubhouse's unpaved overflow lot. Harold brought his speakers and played celebration music, which might have been petty, but felt absolutely appropriate. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Patricia was charged with criminal trespassing, forgery in the second degree, theft of services, and fraud. The local news ran the story with the headline, quote, HOA president arrested at daughter's wedding for property theft, unquote. The video of her arrest went viral, gaining over 2 million views in 3 days. At her arraignment, Patricia pleaded not guilty, claiming she had verbal permission from me, which was immediately disproven by 5 neighbors who testified they heard her say, quote, Richard doesn't need to know until it's too late to stop it, unquote. The judge was particularly interested in the forged signature and her pattern of harassment. The HOA board held an emergency meeting where over 100 residents showed up to demand her removal. Person after person stood up to share their stories of Patricia's abuse of power. The vote to remove her was unanimous, minus Patricia's own vote. When the results were announced, she stood up, pointed at everyone, and screamed, "You're all jealous of my leadership skills. This community will fall apart without me." Then she knocked over a table full of coffee and stormed out. Not before someone snapped a photo that became the new favorite meme in our neighborhood Facebook group. The civil lawsuit Jennifer filed on my behalf sought damages for the destroyed garden, emotional distress, and punitive damages. Patricia tried to countersue for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress because the arrest, quote, ruined the happiest day of her daughter's life, unquote. The judge literally laughed when he read her countersuit and dismissed it immediately. During the civil trial, Jennifer presented evidence that Patricia had commandeered other neighbors' properties for events over the years. Bank records showed she had spent over $30,000 of HOA funds on the wedding, listing the tent rental as, quote, shade structure testing, unquote, and the chairs as, quote, emergency seating reserves, unquote. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. They awarded me $45,000 in actual damages and $200,000 in punitive damages. Patricia's face went from red to purple to white as the amount was read. She screamed, "That's more than my house is worth," unquote, before her lawyer grabbed her arm. 3 weeks later, the criminal trial concluded. Patricia was found guilty on all charges. The judge, who seemed personally offended by her abuse of power, sentenced her to 18 months in prison, 3 years probation, and $50,000 in fines. As the sentence was read, Patricia fainted dramatically, falling sideways out of her chair. When they revived her, she sobbed, "But I'm on the garden club board," unquote, as if that somehow made her immune to consequences.